Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Life is going to be even more expensive for Canadians as the Bank of Canada raised its key lending rate once again. Our country's emergency preparedness minister has an update on the many wildfires which continue to burn across the country. And the Canadian military is doing some very important training exercises here in the Windy City, efforts aimed at saving lives.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Bank of Canada raised its prime lending rate yet again. The central bank's quarter percentage point rate hike to 4.75% is the highest point since 2001. The bank said inflation came in hotter than expected in April, with prices for a broad range of goods and services rising more than anticipated. The annual inflation rate ticked up slightly in April to 4.4%. That marks the first rise in inflation since last summer. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland responded to the Bank of Canada's decision to raise its key interest rate from 4.5% to 4.75%. She says the Canadian economy continues to recover post-COVID by adding a number of jobs.
In the first 4 months of 2023, the Canadian economy added nearly 250,000 jobs. We have now recovered 129% of the jobs that were lost in the first months of the pandemic, compared to just 115% in the United States. And at 5%, Canada's unemployment rate remains near its historic low. That really matters in the lives of Canadians across the country.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says the Trudeau government really needs to stop the spending and get its financial house in order. He says inflation is really hurting Canadians right now.
It's not just me anymore pointing out that deficits drive inflation. It's Liberals. It's the former Liberal finance minister, John Manley, who said that the Liberal deficits are a bit like driving your car with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake, generally, especially if there's slushy conditions under your tires, end quote. He's pointing out that this Prime Minister presses his foot on the inflationary gas pedal while the Bank of Canada has to press on the brakes. The engine is eventually going to blow. We know Canadians cannot pay their bills. Will the Prime Minister be honest today and tell Canadians how much their mortgage payments will go up because of these rate hikes?
We made a decision that kids under 12 in this country shouldn't have to pay for dental care. Their families should be able to send them to the dentists. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative politicians who all have access to dental care through the House of Commons supports for their kids don't think Canadians who can't afford to send their kids to the dentist should be doing that, and they say that's inflationary. Mr. Speaker, that approach around cuts and austerity is not what Canadians need.
Conservative MP Michael Cooper and NDP MP Peter Julian say a public inquiry on foreign interference is needed yesterday. Former Governor General David Johnston, who filed a report on the matter, says it's simply not necessary. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says opposition attacks on Johnston's character are irresponsible and parliamentarians need to work together.
We need is an independent public inquiry. What we need right now were answers from Mr. Johnson, and what we got was a special rapporteur, a fake rapporteur, who was confused, who wasn't on top of his brief, and couldn't explain key conclusions that brushed away Beijing's interference and the Prime Minister's failure to act. What Mr. Johnson's report is nothing more than a whitewash. It has no credibility, and Mr. Johnson demonstrated that today in his inability to answer the most basic question.
My sense after listening to his testimony is I'm even more, I think, convinced that a public inquiry is the only way to restore public confidence.
Well, I worry a great deal about the credibility of our democratic institutions and foreign interference, and that's what this report is all about.
Canada's Emergency Preparedness Minister provided an update on his government's response to the wildfires, which continue to burn across the country. Bill Blair says many wildfires are still burning in many regions.
As of today, there are 2,293 wildfires that have occurred in Canada. Approximately 3.8 million hectares have been burned. And across the country, as of today, there are 414 wildfires burning, 239 of which are determined to be out of control. Also, as of today, an estimated 20,183 people remain evacuated from their homes and communities. And while this is an overall reduction in parts of Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, where people have been able to return home, many are still displaced. And as fires continue to threaten their communities, we're working very closely with our provincial, territorial, and municipal partners and First Nations partners to ensure that we provide support to those who have been evacuated.
Emergency officials in Alberta say there are currently 65 wildfires burning here in our province. Of those fires, 19 are classified as out of control, 17 are being held, and 29 are under control. 3,600 Albertans are still evacuated, and there are around 2,800 personnel working in the wildfires, including support from across the country, also the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and even the Canadian military. Evacuation orders continue for the hamlet of Fort Chipewyan, the Mikisew First Nation, the Fort Chipewyan Métis Nation, and the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation. Still praying for more rain for those northern Alberta communities. For our region here, we experienced lots of sunshine again today, and Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, it felt a lot like summer again today, but soon it may begin to feel like spring once again?
Yeah, well, that's probably because our humidex is sitting at 30 today, which is very humid conditions, especially around these parts. Now, you couple that with sunshine, a UV index of 9 and a high of 29 degrees. You got yourself a very hot summer day, and we haven't even hit summer solstice yet. So expect more of those conditions tomorrow with that high humidex, looking at 31 for a humidex on Thursday, high of 28 degrees. Now, as far as showers goes, we could see some more of those this evening, along with a risk of a thunderstorm, and that could last into Thursday, seeing that chance of a thunderstorm there. And I will be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast, along with a look at the national forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The results from the recent Alberta election will be made official on Thursday. The UCP won a slim majority, winning 49 seats to the NDP's 38. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, says the relationship between Premier Daniel Smith and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau should be a little interesting moving forward.
Part of the reason why the UCP dumped Jason Kenney was because they thought he was too soft on Ottawa. Now, that was not a big issue during the election campaign, I wouldn't say, the whole Ottawa-Alberta relationship. But it is something that the party's base, party members, care very, very deeply about. So it is going to be interesting to see how Danielle Smith, who seems to have moved a little bit to the middle, sort of navigates that challenge a little bit between doing what her party members and her caucus might want versus what sort of the rest of the province wants. Plus, are the Trudeau folks going to play ball? Are they going to play nice? Are they going to play mean? I mean, it's a little up in the air, but certainly the tone set right off the bat is a pretty aggressive one, I would say.
Tyler Dawson will also explain where he thinks the number of votes which didn't go to the UCP ended up, and it wasn't with the NDP. He'll explain coming up in the second half of our program. An investigation has been launched following an incident in which an RCMP officer from Valley View shot and killed a man on Monday night. Police say officers were called about a report of a suicidal man with a firearm in the town located about 350 kilometers northwest of Edmonton. When police arrived at the home, the man was found outside with a firearm. Now, Mounties say after talking with the man and trying to defuse the situation, an officer fired their gun. The man died on the way to hospital. You may have heard some large cargo planes and helicopters taking off on Wednesday morning at the Lethbridge Airport. The Royal Canadian Air Force 435 Transport and Rescue Squadron invited members of the media to witness different training exercises that staff within the military are currently undertaking to help save lives. BCN's Micah Quinn was there and has more.
This year's annual training exercise is taking place right here in Lethbridge, and staff from 435 Squadron explained to us what a few of these training scenarios will look like for each team.
Today, one of the aircraft is going to be going out to Cranbrook. There's one of those Casera aircraft that the CEO was talking about, and it's simulating that it's currently having some electrical issues. It's trying to make its way back to Cranbrook. So one of our aircraft is going to go fly out there, escort them to Cranbrook because of their electrical issues. They may have trouble navigating. In the scenario itself, we're going to simulate that won't be able to make it to Cranbrook, so there's a ground team set up. and our search and rescue technicians are going to jump to the ground by parachute, provide medical aid on the ground, and then they'll be evacuated to a hospital. Other scenarios, we're simulating that there was a float plane crash at Beaver Mines Lake. So another team is going to be deployed out there. They're going to parachute to the water, where there's also the HMCS Tecumseh, the Naval Reserve. They have a boat on that lake, and we're going to have a helicopter go extract them. And then we have some other scenarios in the mountains and Porcupine Hills area as well.
There are currently over 100 people taking part in the action from various Royal Canadian Air Force agencies, including support from 17 Wing Winnipeg and 19 Wing Comox, along with members of the United States Air Force and several other teams from across Canada.
It's pretty important because the mission may come any day, any night, or weekend. We have crews on alert constantly.
Military training exercises will run in Lethbridge until June 12th. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
To mark Seniors Week here in our city, the Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is hosting different events for residents to participate in. This week is a chance to celebrate all things senior. Executive Director of the Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization, Rob Miyashiro, says it's a very important endeavor.
This is actually a provincial initiative for Alberta seniors in housing. Unfortunately, because of the election this year, there's been really nothing in May or April happening with that department to spearhead this. Usually there's this big launch for Seniors Week somewhere in a community in Alberta. Last year was in Tabor for the whole province, which was kind of cool. This year, I think most communities are left kind of on their own and to see how that's going to work. Other than that, it's an opportunity, I think, for us to reflect that seniors are soon to be one of the largest age cohorts in Alberta.
A full list of the center's events taking place this week can be found on the LSCO's website. The Lethbridge Farmers Market returns to our city this weekend at the Lethbridge and District Exhibitions North Pavilion. Now, the market gets underway this Saturday and will feature some really tasty home-baked goodies, fresh produce, and unique crafts. Mike Workington, CEO of the Lethbridge and District Exhibition, says with the new trade center opening up fairly soon, the farmers market will move into the new space and will hopefully attract many more people.
We are anticipating moving it over there as quickly as we can. Obviously, there's still some construction going on. You can hear it in the background. But we do anticipate the farmers market being in Hall D, so the furthest south trade hall, so easily accessible to get around the building. And once people get in there, you'll really start to feel, and that will likely be its home for the future. We'll work with the vendors on move-in timelines. We'll give them as much notice as we can. Obviously, we're at the mercy a little bit of a construction schedule and still dealing with some supply chain things.
The market, which kicks off this weekend, will run each Saturday through October the 14th. You know, when it comes to warding off dementia, one of the best things you can do is stay away from sugar. Now, that's according to family doctor and best-selling author Dr. Don Colbert. Dr. Colbert says there's a direct correlation between our gut and brain health. He says if you want to reverse memory loss and reduce the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's, consider a certain keto diet.
The most powerful diet for the brain is the healthy ketogenic diet. Now, 99% of keto diets are unhealthy because they have tremendous amounts of inflammatory foods like butter and cheese and big slabs of meat and bacon and lard and stuff like that, which is terrible and inflammatory. So what I do is I put people on a healthy keto diet with lots of healthy plant oils like olive oil and avocado oil and nuts and seeds, as well as fish oils. These are really healthy for the brain. Lots of veggies, lots of fiber. But what I take away is the sugar. The brain craves sugar, but sugar is detrimental to the brain. It literally ages the brain and creates insulin resistance to the brain.
Dr. Colbert will have more on how sugar impacts the brain coming up later in our broadcast. A convenience store in Winnipeg has applied for a dining room liquor license. A spokesperson for 7-Eleven restaurant says the location is being remodeled with an eating area furnished with tables and seating. There are already licensed 7-Eleven restaurants in Alberta and Ontario, but the plan would be a first for Manitoba. The company says if it gets the go-ahead for the license, several safety controls will be in place and the beer and wine would be locked up. Now, still with the Manitoba capital, some students at an elementary school in Winnipeg will be receiving 30 minutes of religious teaching next year after the Division's Board of Trustees passed a new bylaw. Child Evangelism Fellowship, a faith-based group out of Missouri, will be running religious teachings over the lunch hour at Strathmillan School. The St. James Assiniboia School Division says only kids of parents who signed a petition to introduce the program will take it. The Christian charity called Help the Persecuted has assisted more than 950 Sudanese refugees who have fled the conflict in their country to begin new lives in Egypt. Along with providing medical help, food, and water, they're sharing the hope of Christ along with offering prayers for everyone they help. We have more now in this report.
As thousands continue to flee the conflict in Sudan, Christian charity Help the Persecuted has helped more than 950 refugees who've crossed the border into Egypt in desperate need. Their field ministry team set up a medical centre at a bus station near the city of Aswan, while also providing food supplies, water, bathroom facilities, Christian literature and spiritual support. The charity's Daniel Chwai says some of their team took great risks to serve as they face continued persecution for their faith.
Not only they are persecuted, and not only they are threatened, they even had to relocate and move out of the country because of death threats. It was really moving to see the team fearlessly serving among the Sudanese and in Egypt, because they came back and they wanted to serve.
Despite these challenges, Daniel says they've used every opportunity to share the hope of Christ with many broken lives.
I remember a lady that shared, "I lost everything. All that is left is broken. And who can fix my soul?" That was something that we could share and say that Jesus Christ will. Jesus Christ will fix your soul.
And Help the Persecuted will continue to provide ongoing support to the many hundreds of people arriving into Egypt in search of a new life. Peter Wooding reporting for the Global News Alliance.
Help the Persecuted doing some great work overseas. Hopefully you wore lots of sunscreen if you were out and about today in Lethbridge. It was nice and hot, but some rain and cooler temperatures, however, are on the way. A full look at the weather pictures on deck. It felt a little humid or muggy today in parts of southwestern Alberta. We had some moisture along with some very warm temperatures. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the mercury, however, may be dropping a little bit with more moisture on the way?
Yeah, well, you know how the mercury will drop, but just a slight bit there on Friday down to 20 degrees. Still staying in that seasonal range, though. And as for moisture, yes, lots of it on the way, including this evening. Tomorrow, Thursday, risk of thunderstorms as well. We could see some more rain on Friday evening as well. And then pretty clear for the weekend, mainly cloudy skies, though, on Saturday. There's that nice 25 degrees for both Saturday and Sunday. Sunday, lots of sunshine. And then Sunday evening, we could see more rain developing, giving us some shower activity on Monday as well with a high of 26. And then rounding out that 7-day forecast with a high of 28 degrees on Tuesday with a mix of sun and clouds. So we're certainly above that average range for this time of year, which is 21. Average low is 7 degrees. 33 was our high temperature back in 1996. And in 1999, look what happened there. It was -1, very chilly for this time of year. 5:25, that's when the sun rose this morning, sunset this evening at 9:36 p.m. So we're at 16 hours and 11 minutes of daylight. Okay, on the west coast tomorrow, fairly sunny conditions. Victoria looking at a high of 23 degrees, but 18 by the water. 50K winds in that Juan de Fuca Strait. It's a windy one there. 23 degrees expected in Vancouver, 26 inland. Lots of sunshine, sunny conditions in Edmonton. And look at that temperature there in Edmonton, 29 degrees. Same thing for Calgary, but Calgary looking at a chance of showers, 30% actually, and a risk of a thunderstorm there. As we move to the rest of the prairies, we're still seeing very, very warm conditions, high of 30 degrees in Saskatoon. Regina, high 29, looking at a chance of showers. Also, Regina under a severe thunderstorm watch this evening. Could also see some thunder shower activity tomorrow, Thursday. As we get into, move into southern Manitoba there, Winnipeg looking at a high of 25 degrees, also with some showers and a risk of a thunderstorm. So we're still looking at widespread smoke in the central part of the country. Toronto, high of 19 degrees, high of 20 degrees in Ottawa. Both of those cities still sitting under those special air quality statements with the pollutants reducing the quality of the air, and that's basically coming from those forest fires in Ontario and in Quebec. Montreal looking at a 40% chance of showers, though, 18 degrees for a high there. Lots of rain expected on the east coast tomorrow. As we look to the Maritimes, Fredericton expecting 2 to 4 millimeters of rain, 16 for a high there. Halifax looking at 30% chance of showers. Same thing for Charlottetown. Both of those cities looking at a high of 15 degrees tomorrow. St. John's 17, looking at some fog and some drizzle as well there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Mortgages, credit cards, and line of credit rates are all going up once again. The Bank of Canada increased its key lending rate 1/4 percentage point today from 4.5% to 4.75%. That's the highest level in 20 years. The central bank's increase comes as inflation continues to climb. It noted that the price of goods and services rose higher than anticipated in April. The annual rate of inflation rose slightly last month to 4.4%. That marks the first rise in inflation since last summer. Stats Canada says our country's merchandise trade surplus rose $1.9 billion in April. The agency says higher exports of gold, oil, cars and light trucks led the way as exports rose 2.5% to $64.8 billion. Meanwhile, imports dropped 0.2% in April to $62.9 billion as imports of energy products dropped 12.8%. Crude oil imports were down 20.5% due in large part to lower shipments from the United States and Saudi Arabia. The Saskatchewan government's agri-food exports are up 75% in the first quarter of this year. Agri-food exports surged to around $6 billion, with canola oil, canola seed, wheat, and lentils leading the way. The province's high agri-food prices and increased supply are fueling the growth and its value. Agriculture Minister David Merritt says it shows global investors that Saskatchewan producers are in a great position to feed the whole world today and into the future. Tim Hortons is launching a credit card that can be used through its mobile app. The company says Tim's Financial will offer a no annual fee MasterCard powered by Neo Financial. Customers will be able to earn Tim's rewards points on purchases, including for groceries, gas, transit, and extra points at Tim Hortons restaurants. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 71 points on the day to finish at 19,983. The Dow was up 91 points to 33,665. The S&P 500 was down 16 on the day to 4267, and the Nasdaq was down 171 points to 13,104. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 79 cents to $72.53 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 7 cents to $2.33 US. Gold was even on the day at $19.40.02 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $23.43 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.21 per bushel, barley's at $8.97, canola's at $15.40, and corn is at $10.26 per bushel. Live cattle were down 83 cents to $179. Feeder cattle August contract was down $4.15 to $239.10, and lean hogs were down 60 cents to $87.70. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.49 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Bank of Canada raised its prime lending rate yet again. The central bank's quarter-point rate hike to 4.75% is the highest level since 2001. The bank said inflation came in hotter than expected in April, with prices for a broad range of goods and services rising more than anticipated. The annual inflation rate ticked up slightly in April to 4.4%. That marks the first rise in inflation since last summer. Now that the dust is slowly settling on the Alberta election, what will the working relationship be like between Premier Daniel Smith of the UCP and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with the Liberals? Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will give us his thoughts momentarily. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The whole family is invited to the Lethbridge Public Library Crossings branch on June 16th from 5 to 7 p.m. for their Pajama Party Friday. Taking place in the large Friends Place meeting room, enjoy popcorn and juice, listen to music, play your favorite board games, build with Lego, or hang with the toys. For more details, visit lethlib.ca. Do you have a heart to serve our community? The Lethbridge Soup Kitchen is looking for volunteers to help prepare, serve, and clean up after meals that are given every day. The Lethbridge Soup Kitchen's mission is to help alleviate the struggle of poverty for individuals and families who are poor, have very limited income, or just in need of a hot meal. They also desire to increase public awareness of the needs of the poor and homeless in Lethbridge. For information and to volunteer, visit lethbridgesoupkitchen.ca. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The official Alberta election results will be released on Thursday. Now, they'll confirm that both the UCP's Tyler Shandro and Whitney Issik lost their seats. Now, Shandro lost by just 7 votes. What's most interesting right now is how Premier Daniel Smith's cabinet will shape up moving forward. To chat about this in more detail is our political reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us from Edmonton. Tyler, could we see somebody like maybe Nathan Neudorf, who was infrastructure minister and deputy premier, get an even juicier portfolio?
It seems likely. You know, part of what Danielle Smith's challenge is going to be is she's lost a lot of her sort of longer term cabinet ministers and people with more experience. You know, you had Sonia Savage and Travis Taves, the energy minister and finance minister respectively, who decided not to run again. You had, I think, 6 or 7 ministers total who lost their elections, including Tyler Shandro, including Casey Madhu. So, you know, who does she pick? And the other thing is that there's 49 UCP MLAs, and Danielle Smith's last cabinet had 25 members. So is half of her caucus going to also be in cabinet? That seems sort of strange. So she's going to have a little bit of an experience problem, frankly. It doesn't mean that, you know, less experienced or newer MLAs can't turn into great ministers. Travis Taves, I believe, was only a one-term member of the government. But it is a little bit of a challenge. You know, usually there's sort of this stack of people who've been around for a long time for a premier or a prime minister to choose from, and she does not have that at the moment. We should know, I think by Friday seems to be sort of the chatter going around that's when cabinet will be released. So there will be, I think, a few interesting people and maybe a few surprises in there.
Yeah, maybe some rookies getting some interesting portfolios as cabinet ministers. Now, Tyler, the NDP picked up seats. The UCP lost around 14 seats this election, but still formed a slim majority. Now, you say some of the votes the Conservatives lost didn't necessarily go to the NDP. Can you explain?
Well, it's really hard to know, right? You know, it's not like there's great data on where votes moved throughout the election. But if you sort of look at some of the numbers, you can make a few guesses. You know, the NDP, for example, picked up give or take 150,000 votes from 2019, and the Alberta Party lost, give or take, 150,000 votes. So maybe you can look at that and say, okay, well, the NDP's performance in 2023 came largely from Alberta Party voters. You could maybe conclude that, but really hard to say for certain. And now you have the UCP, which had over 1 million votes in 2019, and they lost about 100,000, I think, somewhere in that range. But did they all go to the NDP? Well, if you look at the Alberta Party numbers and conclude that they went to the NDP, maybe these UCP numbers didn't. So it's all kind of speculative. But at the end of the day, what this could mean is that you had a good number of United Conservative voters who stayed home on the election, who maybe weren't certain about Danielle Smith, maybe lean conservative, but aren't, you know, totally conservative, but don't like the NDP either. And they just decided to go for a pizza or go for a haircut or who knows. So it's not like we have really clear information on what happened here, but some of the chatter, some of the discussion that's happening among columnists, among pundits, among political analysts seems to be that maybe there actually was a bit of a turnout issue for the UCP, and that maybe explains some of the things that went wrong in some of those ridings that they lost.
There was also a recent report that came out which said that some voters in the rural ridings were actually turned away at the polls.
Oh, really?
In Nobleford, just outside of Lethbridge here.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard anything about that. You know, there's usually on election day, there's sort of the odd controversy over people who don't know what ID they need to bring or whether they need to have an attestation, things like that. And of course, there was the discussion on election night about why everything was so slow and whether or not there was an issue with tabulators. So it seems like it all largely worked out, but there's a few hours there on election night in particular when people are kind of scratching their heads wondering what was going on.
Yeah, we're still trying to recover more than a week later after election night, working the 14, 16 hours. Tyler, the UCP were shut out of Edmonton, although they did pick up some seats around the area, around the provincial capital. Premier Smith has proposed a council of defeated candidates to advise her on the issues in Edmonton. So how do you think this is going to go over with Edmonton City Council and the NDP?
Well, a little bit like a lead balloon. The city council, well, the mayor, Amarjeet Sohi, came out and said, look, we've got representatives on city council. By all means, give us a call. We'd be happy to talk. And the NDP said in sort of this tongue-in-cheek brief press release saying that we've got a council of the elected that you're certainly welcome to consult on Edmonton issues. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, this government, it's been a bit of a joke over the past 4 years that this government, it loves its consultations, it loves its studies, it loves its panels. I mean, I could name probably almost a half dozen of them off the top of my head. So it's not out of character, I don't think. And, a couple of the political types I've been talking to who aren't even necessarily affiliated with the UCP say, if I was in their position, I would do the same thing. Why not? But certainly the people who did win election are saying, well, gosh, why not ask us? But of course, they're not going to get some of the information they want if there's those sorts of consultations happening. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with it. This was sort of a proposal more than a here's the plan of what exactly we're going to do. So details on that may be yet to come, but it would not surprise me if we saw some of those familiar yet defeated faces pop up.
Tyler, now that the dust has settled somewhat on the Alberta election, what will the relationship look like moving forward between Danielle Smith's UCP and the Trudeau government?
That is a great question, and I think a little bit of an open question. On her election night speech, Danielle Smith took quite a strong tone towards Ottawa, saying, I hope cabinet minister, or I hope Trudeau's caucus and cabinet are watching right now, basically saying that they're going to fight the Trudeau government every step of the way on various proposals, the net zero of the electricity grid being one of them, an emissions cap on the oil and gas sector being another. But a couple days later, the various Liberals on Parliament Hill who are in cabinet took a little bit more of a conciliatory tone, I think it would be fair to say. You Dominic LeBlanc, who's the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, saying he anticipates a good working relationship. He's going into it with an open mind, those sorts of things. So, I mean, of course, no politician in Ottawa is going to come out and say, no, we're gonna give as good as we get kind of thing. We're going to fight back too. That's just, not really the way the federal government is about to do things in public. But part of this is going back in the history a bit, but part of the reason why the UCP dumped Jason Kenney was because they thought he was too soft on Ottawa. Now, that was not a big issue during the election campaign, I wouldn't say, the whole Ottawa-Alberta relationship. But it is something that the party's base, party members care very, very deeply about. So it is going to be interesting to see how Danielle Smith, who seems to have moved a little bit to the middle, sort of navigates that challenge a little bit between doing what her party members and her caucus might want versus what sort of the rest of the province wants. Plus, are the Trudeau folks going to play ball? Are they going to play nice? Are they going to play mean? I mean, it's a little up in the air, but certainly the tone set right off the bat is a pretty aggressive one, I would say.
Premier Smith said one of her first orders of business once she was reelected was to bring forth legislation that requires a referendum on tax increases. But Tyler, what else do we know about the UCP's agenda moving forward? Will Calgary finally get its new arena?
That seems to still be sort of under discussion. I think it's a definite possibility. There was some talk this week at City Council, I believe, about what that proposal was going to look like. I expect that'll be the sort of thing we hear quite a bit about over the summer. One of the things about the UCP's legislative agenda is it doesn't seem like they're going to be sitting this summer. They're most likely to come back in October. Presumably because they need to get a bunch of their ducks in a row and decide how they're going to roll out that legislative agenda. But we don't expect to see a whole lot of movement legislatively in the next few months here, which is going to make things rather quiet. But also it'll give them time to hash stuff out. How do you write a bill for a referendum on tax increases? What's that going to include? All that kind of stuff. So it'll be a bit of a waiting game, frankly.
Danielle Smith made a lot of promises during her campaign. In fact, there didn't appear to be much difference between what she was promising and Rachel Notley and the NDP promised voters. Will Danielle Smith maybe stay the moderate course? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's hard to say. She exhibited what I think is fair to say an unusual amount of message discipline during the campaign. She got herself in hot water a few times prior to the campaign. Obviously, she had a long political career and a long journalism career where there was lots of stuff that she'd said that caused controversy, but she really, really stuck to her moderate talking points, especially on healthcare would be probably the big one, where she was really disciplined in saying that there's not going to be any privatization of healthcare. So what happens if she stays the moderate course? Well, possibly she angers some of her supporters within the party. But if she moves a little bit further to the right, is she going to anger some of the more moderate Albertans that maybe voted for her? So I expect that her path to victory in the future is a more moderate one, given especially how important Calgary and Edmonton are. And obviously those cities are becoming more progressive compared to the rest of the province. But you never know. I think that's probably the logical path for her to follow. But the pressure from the party, the pressure from caucus, as we saw with Jason Kenney, it can make it quite hard to sort of try and chart a moderate course.
So maybe more of a centrist course, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think so. I think that probably, she'll be more right wing on things like the relationship with Ottawa. But do I think that she's going to continue to sort of relitigate some of the COVID-19 stuff? Is she going to tackle some of the promises about adding vaccination status to the Human Rights Code? I think those things are a little bit less likely.
Tyler, Rachel Notley has now lost 2 elections to the UCP. Will she be sticking around as leader, or could we see somebody like Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips or maybe even David Shepherd step into the role?
Yeah, she said she's staying. For what that's worth, politicians do sort of tend to say that and then they're out the door 6 months later. So, I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. I mean, I think this is something that a lot of politics watchers have been wondering and have been talking about. And for the NDP, I think whatever happens, they need to decide whether or not this is the Rachel Notley NDP or the Alberta New Democrats, if you know what I mean. How entwined with the party's identity and the fate of the party is Rachel Notley. The federal NDP went through a similar thing with Jack Layton when he died. And frankly, I think the federal Conservatives went through the same thing when Stephen Harper left. It took, I think, probably both Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer coming to Pierre Poilievre to sort of figure out what the party's identity was. So the NDP is in a bit of an interesting spot because in some ways, Rachel Notley is their strongest asset. But obviously, she's not going to be around forever, whatever happens. So I suspect it's a thing that politics watchers are talking about. I imagine it's the sort of thing that people within the party are considering as well.
Tyler, when I worked on Parliament Hill as a national parliamentary reporter, I remember the orange wave that made its way into our nation's capital. Jack Layton was so popular at that point in time, and many people thought that if he wouldn't have passed on, that he may have become prime minister. He was that popular at that time.
He was. It's amazing in some ways how important a leader is to a party's success. And Rachel Notley, I think, is in a very similar position, and the NDP is as well. So, whether or not they're thinking about it, I mean, honestly, they probably should, because as we've seen with the federal NDP, losing a really popular leader can put you out in the wilderness for quite some time.
The provincial state of emergency has ended for our province, and some fire bans have actually been dropped. They've been lifted in a few regions. But so far this wildfire season, it's been record-breaking. A lot of wildfires, Tyler.
And it's very early. That's the alarming thing about it. I wrote a story maybe last year about the way fires start. And at the beginning of the season, you often have human-caused fires. And as you come later in the season, you end up with lightning strikes and things like that. So there's a lot, obviously, that's within our control, being smart about off-highway vehicle use, being smart about disposing of cigarettes and putting out campfires. But there is also Mother Nature, conspiring against us. So, I really do think that whether the legislature comes back or not, that's probably going to be something that Danielle Smith and her party are going to have to keep an eye on in the next few months, because who knows what happens next,
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks so much, Hal.
Many of us know someone who is struggling with Alzheimer's, dementia, or memory loss. So why are these illnesses on the rise, and is there a way to reduce the likeliness of this happening to you? Well, today's guest has some timely advice on this topic. Dr. John Colbert, he's been a board-certified family practice doctor for more than 25 years and a New York Times best-selling author. His latest book is called Dr. Colbert's Healthy Brain Zone: Reverse Memory Loss and Reduce Your Risk of Dementia and Alzheimer's. Long title, but oh, it's so important. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Colbert. Great to have you on today.
Thank you. It's great being here.
Awesome. Okay, so first off, can you give us a brief snapshot of your book and how can we reverse memory loss? How is that possible?
Well, first of all, realizing because we're seeing so much Alzheimer's nowadays, it's only going to get worse because it's following two major epidemics here in the U.S., in Canada, and throughout the world. It's following the obesity epidemic and the diabetes epidemic. And now, over 100 million people in the U.S. have either diabetes or prediabetes, or almost a third of our population. And those trends are following in most other countries too. And what Alzheimer's is many times it's just, as we call it now, type 3 diabetes or insulin resistance of the brain, where many times the brain just can't take in enough glucose, which is the fuel for the brain. So again, what we do, there's 6 types of Alzheimer's disease, and most people don't realize. They think it's just one type, but there's 6 types. There's 4 kinds of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the number one cause of dementia. About 70% of dementia is caused by Alzheimer's. So I break this down. I teach people how they can screen themselves to see if they have early dementia or if they just have some age-associated memory impairment. And so then we start them on a program on how to heal the brain. The most amazing thing is back in the 1990s, we discovered that the brain has plasticity. In other words, the brain can literally be restored and renewed. We can regrow new neurons, new dendrites, new synapses in the brain. So the brain has the ability to self-repair if we catch the process early enough in the disease process. Once that beta amyloid, that goo, that is all that scar tissue, has accumulated to a degree, it's kind of like picturing a raisin versus a beautiful plump grape. When that grape actually gets dehydrated and forms a raisin, well, eventually that's what happens to the brain with scar tissue and beta amyloid. And when we don't have enough hormones, hormones are amazing for the brain, especially for men, testosterone, and for women, both testosterone and estrogen. But other key hormones, these hormones repair the neurons, repair the synapses, and prevent shrinkage of the brain. And it's something I use commonly. I have to optimize those hormones.
That's fascinating.
But there's other factors involved. There's these powerful plasticity hormones that help the brain regrow and rewire, such as brain-derived neurotrophic factor and nerve growth factor. These are powerful growth factors that are stimulated through certain nutrients and hormones like testosterone and estrogen, but also through intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is one of the most powerful things we can do that'll help boost the brain-derived neurotrophic factor to start to heal the brain and the neurons. And so I go in detail of how to do that, as well as the diet for the brain. The most powerful diet for the brain is the healthy ketogenic diet. Now, 99% of keto diets are unhealthy because they have tremendous amounts of inflammatory foods like butter and cheese and big slabs of meat and bacon and lard and stuff like that, which is terrible and inflammatory. So what I do is I put people on a healthy keto diet with lots of healthy plant oils like olive oil and avocado oil and nuts and seeds, as well as fish oils. These are really healthy for the brain. Lots of veggies, lots of fiber. But what I take away is the sugar. The brain craves sugar, but sugar is detrimental to the brain. It literally ages the brain and creates insulin resistance to the brain. So the diet is absolutely critical for the brain, as well as intermittent fasting. And then I go into all the different nutrients we need for the brain, the lifestyle factors like exercise, sleep. Sleep is critical for the brain. Did you know that sleeping on your side actually removes the most beta amyloid from the brain? Sleeping on your side can remove 10 to 20 times more beta amyloid from the brain. And so many people just sleep on their back or on their tummy, but sleep on your side, that is the key, and then well oxygenated sleep.
So it's a good thing. It's a good thing then to sleep on your side.
Yes, it is. For the brain, it's very good. But what the brain needs more than any nutrient is oxygen. And so many people are losing their memory over the age of 60 because they're not getting enough oxygen to their brain because they have sleep apnea. And it's their palate is sagging down and they're gasping for air, but they're not realizing it and they're forgetting. They're starting to forget. And just simply losing weight or a CPAP or an Inspire device can correct that. It's real simple. So I teach them all the key things. And usually it's the little things we miss that can totally restore the memory.
Now, that is quite the snapshot of your book there in 5 minutes, but I have a question. So you're saying it's almost like an epidemic right now following these horrible diseases like diabetes, but is it because we have so much of a larger aging population right now with the boomers getting older, or is there something more to it? Is it because there's more chemicals in our food and or is it bad health choices? Is it a combination?
It's all of the above. It's all of the above. It's our obesity epidemic. It's our type 2 diabetes, our pre-diabetes epidemic. It's our bad food choices. When we sit down at a meal and we choose that French fries and that deep fried chicken or anything deep fried that's highly inflammatory to the brain, you are inviting Alzheimer's into your brain. And then when they come by with that beautiful dessert tray with all that beautiful chocolate cake, that key lime pie, that ice cream, that's highly inflammatory to the brain. So every choice we make can invite death or Alzheimer's into the brain or dementia or health into the brain. And that's why I choose living foods. I choose lots of olive oil, lots of veggies, healthy proteins, not deep fried.
Yeah, so like the plant-based almost?
Yes, it's so simple. I made it so simple you can't miss it. But if you let your flesh lead you and your sweet tooth, I have too many people tell me, oh, I've got a sweet tooth. I have to have it. No, you don't. You don't want to have Alzheimer's. Every time you make the wrong choices, you are sowing seeds in your brain for Alzheimer's disease. You need to choose living foods so that you can invite life and not have Alzheimer's, not choose Alzheimer's or dementia into your brain. It's real simple.
And you know, we're hearing a lot today about mind and gut, that connection. And so like the healthy gut leading to a healthier brain and vice versa. So it sounds like you're also suggesting that the key ingredient to fighting that memory loss isn't prescriptions or unnatural treatments, but rather in a healthy gut-friendly diet, basically, right?
Absolutely. In fact, a few years ago, I wrote a book called The Healthy Gut Zone, teaching about the key items that harm the gut, which mainly it's antibiotics and antibiotics in the foods we eat, which, by the way, 80% of the antibiotics in our country are given to livestock and chickens. So when you eat those animals, you're getting antibiotics and it's destroying your good bacteria and creating leaky gut, which is eventually can lead to a leaky brain. And so, or leaky blood-brain barrier. So again, it's just putting the right foods in and realize your gut, there's a powerful gut-brain connection, but what is good for the gut is good for the brain. And that's why these gut-healthy foods that I talk about are extremely beneficial to the brain, especially those healthy oils. I talk about olive oil being one of the best you can do, but you want to get the extra virgin high polyphenol olive oils. Those are wonderful for your gut and your brain.
Right. And of course, like now that we're well into 2023, many of us looking for ways to maintain that good health or keep those resolutions that we made back in the beginning of January to start living that healthier lifestyle. So it's obviously, you're saying it's so important for people to understand that inner workings of the brain. So if the path to cognitive health is through a proper diet, what kinds of foods do we need to stay away from? And you were saying like fats, lards, sugar, basically all the stuff that we love. How do we do this and make it simple?
Well, what you have to do is you're going to have to fall in love with olive oil and bring olive oil as a large part of your diet, as well as avocado oil, cold process or cold press avocado oil and other oils and nuts and seeds. Those should be your filler foods. And like I'll get a keto type bread and I'll pour olive oil all over it, and I can start a meal with that, which has got hardly any carbs in it. It has lots of healthy fats in it. So literally it pre-fills you so you can't eat excessive amounts of food. And then start with a nice salad and pour your olive oil on it, not just 1 tablespoon. I'll put 4 to 5 tablespoons of olive oil on my salad. Now you can add some vinegar to it too, or lemon or whatever else, but use a lot of that olive oil. It is so good for you and it pre-fills you so you are full. And so that's one of the healthiest oils for the brain and to decrease inflammation in the body. But that is important. But the most important thing for our brain, the one single thing more important to prevent and reverse Alzheimer's disease is regular exercise. Another thing that so many people put on their New Year's resolution is exercise. They start with good intentions, but they never fulfill it or carry it out. So it's important for the brain to start that exercise program and continue it at least 5 days a week for 20 to 30 minutes. Extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and you also mentioned fasting earlier. So intermittent fasting, it's one way to improve our healthy brain zone. So what does this mean exactly? What does it look like? How do we do that? What exactly does fasting do for us too? Is it almost like hitting a reset button or something?
Well, good question. Well, Jesus taught us in Matthew chapter 6, he taught us when we fast. He also taught us when we pray, when we give, but when we fast, we're expected to fast. But the patients that have the least disease that I see are the ones who practice intermittent fasting on a regular basis, at least 4 to 7 times per week. And you can do this. Generally, most people will do they'll eat in a 10-hour window and they'll fast for 14 hours a day. Usually, which means if they stop eating at 6 at night, they will go until about 8 the next morning, which will be 14 hours. Excuse me. That's 14 hours.
Okay, so it's not as bad as it sounds. It's not as bad as it sounds. Okay.
You generally just skip. You can compress that time and eat your breakfast later, eat your dinner earlier. That's all it is. And so many people only eat 2 meals a day.
Right.
And by doing so, it unleashes this major process in the body where our body undergoes a condition called autophagy, in which we start to clear out abnormal proteins, including beta amyloid. We start to secrete this powerful hormone, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that starts to repair and restore the brain. And we start to recycle cellular components, including proteins and other components, to make new mitochondria, so the brain energy increases, so our brain improves, our mental clarity improves. My patients are amazed at that one single thing, how that improves the brain, probably better than most anything else.
Right, and it almost seems so opposite to what we are used to hearing. We're used to hearing, don't skip meals, don't do the 2 meals a day or the 1 meal a day. You should eat 3 meals, or even like every 2 hours eat something, because it metabolizes you.
We have the scientific support. Used to, we would say, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. Not anymore. We say, eat a late breakfast, an early dinner, eat, and usually a little 8 or 10-hour window. And then literally you unleash this reparative process in the body and in the brain. And my patients feel absolutely amazing when they make this a habit, at least 4 to 7 days a week, and they feel amazing. And I practice this at least 4 to 7 days a week.
Great. So you mentioned your patients. So what kinds of results are you seeing with this in terms of, are these people actually reversing memory loss?
I had a lady just with early Alzheimer's, and her husband was really upset because he felt he was losing his wife. I put her on the program, and he just called us this past week, and he said, listen, I've got to order what my wife's on because her memory's better than mine now, and I need those same nutrients. So I'm telling you, it works. But also, I put on the exercise program, I put on the intermittent fasting program, I put on the sleeping program. It's a lifestyle program in addition to the nutritional program and the dietary program. And it's so simple, and it doesn't cost much at all.
Okay, and I think that a challenge that a lot of us have is sticking to those new programs, those diet, whether it be exercise, whatever it is. So how do we do this easier? Does it come down to having an accountability partner?
Absolutely. Accountability works wonderfully. If you can, again, your spouse or friend or church groups can do it many times. It's just having that accountability buddy will help people when their flesh is weak, because there'll be times the flesh gets weak and it craves those chips at night or is craving that cookie or those crackers or that garbage, I call it, which is garbage to the body. It literally invites disease into the brain and into the body. Wow. So you want to get your nuts, get yourself well stocked. And that's why I have a book that goes with this. My Beyond Keto book talks about the healthy keto diet. And you have to have your cupboards and your fridge stocked with healthy ingredients like the nuts and the seeds and the avocados and the olive oil and the avocado oil. Or else when you get weak, you're going to be reaching for the ice cream and the cookies and the crackers and all the garbage and junk that's garbage to your brain.
Garbage. I love that. That's gonna be my new little catchphrase there. Thank you for that. And thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Colbert. We're out of time, unfortunately.
Well, thank you. And I do have a podcast. They can go to my website at drdrcolbert.com. And I have about 50 or more diseases. I talk about the natural solutions to most every disease on our podcast.
Fascinating. Dr. Colbert is the author of Dr. Colbert's Healthy Brain Zone, Reverse Memory Loss and Reduce Your Risk of Dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's available at drcolberts.com. I'm Jeanette Roche. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks so much for watching.